Don't sit next to them. They smell just like their parents. The words cut through the noisy hallway like a knife. The laughter that followed was even worse, sharp, cruel, echoing against the lockers. 3 sisters stood frozen in place, their books pressed tightly against their chests. Emily, the oldest at 16, lowered her eyes and clenched her jaw. She had heard these words before, countless times, but somehow they always managed to sting. She wrapped a protective arm around her youngest sister, Lily, who already looked like she was about to cry. Beside them, Sarah, 14 and fiery, spun on her heels, glaring at the group of kids who had spoken. "Say that again," she snapped, her voice loud enough to hush the crowd around them. But the kids only laughed harder. Sarah's fists curled, her shoulders squared, and for a moment Emily feared her sister would start a fight right there in the middle of the hallway. This was how it always was. 3 sisters trying to get through a school day, constantly reminded of the one thing they couldn't change, their parents. Their father used to have steady work, their mother used to smile more. But alcohol had become the loudest presence in their small home, drowning out laughter and turning nights into something unpredictable. And though Emily did everything she could to shield Sarah and Lily from it, the truth spilled out into the open the moment they stepped outside. Everyone in town knew. Everyone at school whispered. Teachers gave them looks full of pity, or worse, judgment. Students mocked them behind their backs, sometimes to their faces. And no matter how hard the sisters tried, they couldn't wash off the stain of being the daughters of alcoholics. At lunch that day, Emily sat with her sisters at a corner table, far from the groups of laughing classmates. Lily pushed her food around her tray, barely eating. Sarah muttered curses under her breath, glaring at anyone who dared to glance their way. Emily tried to stay calm, to pretend it didn't matter, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't untangle. She remembered when things hadn't been this bad, when Lily was still in elementary school, when Sarah had friends who actually came over to their house, when she herself believed she might go to college someday. But slowly, the whispers had turned into labels, and the labels had turned into walls. "Why do they hate us so much?" Lily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily's throat tightened. She reached across the table, taking her little sister's hand. "They don't hate you," she said softly. "They just don't understand." But Sarah wasn't having it. "No, they do hate us," she said, slamming her fist onto the table. Heads turned. "They think we're trash. Just like Mom and Dad." Emily shot her a sharp look, but Sarah didn't back down. The anger in her eyes was bright, burning, the only shield she knew how to carry. Lily shrank into herself, and Emily knew she had to hold them both together. That night, as they walked home along cracked sidewalks, the girls didn't talk much. The streetlights flickered above them, and the sound of distant shouting from their neighborhood reminded them of what awaited. Emily carried her school bag like it weighed 100 pounds, Sarah kicked stones with every step, and Lily clung to Emily's arm as if it was the only safe place in the world. When they reached their front door, the muffled sound of bottles clinking inside made them pause. Emily looked at her sisters. She wanted to promise them that things would get better, that one day people would see them differently. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered. "Just remember, we're not them. No matter what they say." And in the silence that followed, all 3 sisters knew, tomorrow at school, the whispers would start again. The next day began like every other, with whispers. Emily led her sisters down the hallway, clutching her books like a shield. Lily kept her head low, her thin shoulders hunched, while Sarah marched forward with that restless fire in her step. The 3 of them tried to ignore the laughter that followed them, the muttered words, the pointing fingers. But by lunchtime, things got worse. Lily stood at her locker, carefully switching out her books, when a group of boys passed by. One of them wrinkled his nose dramatically. "Ugh, who spilled beer in here?" he sneered. The others laughed. Another boy pointed directly at Lily. "Oh wait, never mind. It's just her. The laughter echoed down the hall. Lily froze, her face flushing red. Her eyes watered, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Emily stepped closer, ready to pull her away, but Sarah got there first. "Say that again," Sarah snapped, shoving her locker door shut with a loud clang. The sound turned heads immediately. "Go ahead. I dare you." The boys smirked. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Sarah. "What? You gonna fight us?" one of them mocked. "Relax. We're just saying what everyone's thinking. Your whole family stinks like a bar." That was it. Sarah lunged forward, but Emily grabbed her arm before she could throw a punch. Her heart raced, her mind screaming, "Not here, not like this." "Sarah, stop," Emily hissed, pulling her sister back. "They're not worth it." But Sarah's chest rose and fell like she was ready to explode. Her glare could have burned holes through the boys' smug faces. Lily stood frozen, clutching her book so tightly her knuckles turned white. A teacher walked by, pausing at the tense scene. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone flat, uninterested. The boys quickly shook their heads. "No, ma'am. We were just joking." The teacher gave them a warning glance but didn't press further. She didn't even look at the sisters before walking away. It was as if she'd already made her judgment, troublemakers, just like the family they came from. When the hallway cleared, Emily guided her sisters toward the cafeteria. She could feel Sarah trembling with rage beside her, and Lily wiping tears from her cheeks. Emily wanted to say something comforting, something that would erase the sting, but all that came out was, "Don't give them what they want. That's exactly what they're waiting for." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah. And what do we get? Nothing. Just more of the same." Lily stayed silent, her small frame pressed against Emily's side. That evening, when they returned home, the sound of bottles clattering on the kitchen counter reminded them of everything the boys had said. Their father's voice was loud, their mother's laugh slurred, and the smell of alcohol drifted through the thin walls of their small house. In her room, Emily sat by the window with her homework spread out but untouched. She stared at the flickering streetlight outside, her thoughts heavy. She wanted so badly to give her sisters hope, but the truth was cruel, the world had already decided who they were. And yet, as she listened to Sarah pacing in anger and Lily quietly crying into her pillow, Emily whispered to herself, "No. We'll show them. Somehow, we'll show them." She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But she knew she had to find a way. Because if they didn't, the world's cruel judgment would crush them before they ever had a chance to prove it wrong. The morning sun poured through the classroom windows, but the atmosphere inside was anything but warm. Emily sat at her desk, scribbling notes into her worn notebook. Sarah sat 2 rows behind her, tapping her pencil impatiently, while Lily, in her small voice, tried to answer a question when called on. At first, everything seemed like just another day. But then it happened. Lily had stood up, nervously holding her worksheet. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. It wasn't perfect, but she was trying. Emily watched with quiet pride. Until their teacher, Mrs. Harlan, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, interrupted. "Sit down, Lily," she said flatly. "If you spent less time daydreaming and more time focusing, you'd actually get this right." The class chuckled. Lily's cheeks burned crimson as she sank back into her seat, staring at the floor. Emily's chest tightened, her fists clenching beneath her desk. But Mrs. Harlan wasn't finished. She glanced at Sarah, who was glaring openly, and then at Emily. Her lips curved into something close to disdain. "Honestly, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised," she added, her voice carrying through the quiet classroom. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The words hit like a hammer. Emily felt her stomach drop. Sarah's pencil snapped in her hand. And Lily. Lily shrank even smaller, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with the faint sound of whispers. Some students exchanged knowing glances, others smirked. The weight of judgment pressed down heavier than ever. Emily wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and shout that they weren't their parents, that they were not doomed to repeat the same mistakes. But her throat felt tight, her voice trapped somewhere deep inside. She could only watch as Sarah muttered something under her breath, low but dangerous. After class, the sisters walked together down the hall. Sarah's face was red with fury. "Did you hear her? Did you hear what she said?" she exploded, slamming her locker door shut so hard that nearby students jumped. She humiliated Lily in front of everyone. Emily placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. "I heard," she said softly, though her own heart pounded with anger. "But yelling back at her won't change anything." "Then what will?" Sarah shot back. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "We just sit there and take it. Every single day." Emily didn't have an answer. She glanced at Lily, who walked silently, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack. The youngest sister's silence was the most painful of all, not anger, not defiance, just quiet shame. That night, Emily lay awake long after her sisters had fallen asleep. The sound of bottles clinking downstairs seeped through the floorboards, but her mind was on the classroom. On the smirks of her classmates. On the teacher's cutting words. She whispered into the darkness, more to herself than anyone else. "She thinks we're doomed. They all do. But I'll prove them wrong. I have to." And though the night outside was heavy and still, something had begun to shift inside Emily. For the first time, she wasn't just enduring. She was planning. The week dragged on, each day heavier than the last. Whispers followed the sisters like shadows, and Mrs. Harlan's piercing gaze never softened. Every mistake Lily made in class was highlighted, every restless fidget of Sarah was noted with disdain. And Emily endured, swallowing her anger until it weighed like lead in her chest. But on Friday, everything snapped. It happened during history class. Mrs. Harlan had called on Lily to answer a question about the lesson. Lily, nervous as always, stumbled over her words. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she tried to recall the answer. Before Lily could finish, Mrs. Harlan sighed dramatically. "Really, Lily? Is it that difficult? Maybe if you weren't so distracted, you'd be able to keep up. Honestly, sometimes I wonder why I even bother." The class erupted in quiet chuckles. A few students exchanged mocking glances. Sarah's jaw tightened, her pencil scratching furiously across her notebook as if carving her anger into the paper. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She had told herself to stay quiet, to keep her head down, but this was too much. "Stop it," Emily's voice cut across the room. The laughter died instantly. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Even Lily's widened in shock. Emily rose slowly from her seat, her hands gripping the desk so hard her knuckles turned white. "Don't talk to her like that," Emily continued, her voice trembling at first, then growing steadier. "She's trying. You don't see how hard she studies every night. You don't see how much she wants to prove herself." Mrs. Harlan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Emily, sit down. This isn't the time." "No." Emily's voice rang louder, her words echoing against the walls. "This is the time. Because every day, you let people laugh at us. You treat us like we're less than everyone else, just because of who our parents are. But we are not them. We are not defined by what happens at home. We are more than that." Gasps rippled through the classroom. Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her expression fiery but proud. Lily's cheeks glistened with tears, though for the first time, they weren't from shame, they were from relief. Someone had finally said what she couldn't. Mrs. Harlan's eyes narrowed. That's enough, Emily. Out. Now. Emily's chest heaved, but she didn't back down. Fine, she spat, grabbing her notebook. At least I said it. The classroom buzzed with whispers as Emily stormed toward the door. Sarah shot her a quick nod of approval, while Lily mouthed a silent thank you. For a brief, fragile moment, Emily felt lighter, as though she had finally broken through the suffocating silence. But the victory was short-lived. Later that afternoon, Emily was called into the principal's office. The conversation was brief and cold. Words like disruption, disrespect, and consequences filled the room. Emily left with a warning on her record, another mark, another reason for the school to see her the way they already did. When she returned home, Sarah practically cheered. You should have seen their faces, she said, pacing the room like a fighter replaying a match. Finally, someone shut her up. But Emily only sighed, sinking into her chair. It won't change anything, she whispered. Not yet. And yet, deep inside, a small ember glowed. For the first time, Emily realized that words could pierce the walls of prejudice, even if it came with a cost. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain, silence was no longer an option. The Monday after Emily's outburst carried a heavy silence. Students still whispered when the sisters walked into class, but this time there was something different in the air. The laughter wasn't as sharp. Some of the stares seemed almost curious instead of mocking. Yet the sting of Mrs. Harlan's disapproval hung over Emily like a storm cloud. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, Emily was asked to stay behind. Fear tightened in her chest. She expected another lecture, another mark against her record. Instead, she was escorted to a quiet office at the end of the hall. The name on the door read, Mr. Daniels, school psychologist. The room smelled faintly of coffee and books. On the walls were posters about resilience, kindness, and courage. Mr. Daniels, a man in his early 40s with kind but tired eyes, motioned for Emily to sit. I heard about Friday, he said, leaning back in his chair. His voice wasn't sharp, like the principal's, or judgmental, like Mrs. Harlan's. It was calm, steady. I wanted to check in with you. Emily's shoulders tensed. If you're here to tell me I was out of line. But he raised a hand gently. Actually, I wanted to say. I admire what you did. Emily blinked, caught off guard. You, what? You stood up for your sister. That takes courage, he said. Not everyone has the strength to speak when they see something unfair. Most kids your age would have stayed quiet. You didn't. For the first time in days, Emily felt her defenses falter. She stared at her hands, twisting nervously in her lap. It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to change their minds. They all think we're just broken, like our parents. Mr. Daniels leaned forward, his expression earnest. Emily, listen to me. You are not your parents. And neither are your sisters. The mistakes of adults don't define the children. But I know how cruel people can be when they decide to label someone. It's unfair, but it can be challenged. His words sank deep, like rain into parched soil. For the first time, Emily felt seen, not as an extension of her parents, not as a stereotype, but as herself. Mr. Daniels continued, here's what I'm offering. I want to work with you and your sisters. If you're willing, I'll be at your side. When teachers or students cross the line, I'll step in. But more than that, I'll help you build your own voice. You've already taken the first step. Emily hesitated. Why? Why would you care? He sighed softly, folding his hands. Because when I was your age, I was where you are. My father drank too much. People looked at me and saw his failures, not my potential. It nearly broke me. The only reason I made it through was because one teacher believed in me. I want to be that person for you. The room blurred as Emily's eyes filled. She quickly wiped at them, embarrassed. But Mr. Daniels only smiled gently. "You don't have to carry this alone, Emily. Not anymore." When she left his office, her steps felt lighter. Sarah and Lily were waiting outside, their faces etched with worry. Sarah was the first to speak. "So? What did he say? Trouble again?" Emily shook her head, a small, determined smile spreading across her lips. "No. Not trouble. We've got someone on our side now." For the first time in a long while, hope flickered between the sisters like a fragile flame. The week after Emily's talk with Mr. Daniels began with a hushed tension in the air. Whispers still followed the sisters, but something subtle had shifted. They weren't just subjects of ridicule anymore, now there was curiosity. Some classmates even looked at them with a flicker of respect, though few were brave enough to say anything out loud. But the teachers? That was another story. On Wednesday morning, Emily walked into history class to find Mrs. Harlan already glaring at Lily. The poor girl had barely sat down when the teacher snapped, "Lily, your homework is incomplete again. If you can't keep up, maybe this school isn't the right place for you." Emily's stomach knotted. She was about to speak, but before she could, a calm but firm voice echoed from the back of the classroom. "That's enough, Mrs. Harlan." Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Daniels, holding a clipboard against his chest. His expression wasn't angry, but steady, the kind of look that silences a room without raising the volume. Mrs. Harlan stiffened. "Excuse me. This is my classroom." "And this," Mr. Daniels replied, stepping inside, "is a school that's supposed to educate children, not humiliate them. What you just did was neither teaching nor discipline, it was shaming." Gasps rippled through the students. No one had ever spoken to Mrs. Harlan like that. Her cheeks flushed crimson, but before she could retort, Mr. Daniels continued, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "I've observed enough these past weeks. And it's not just you. Too many of us here have allowed prejudice to guide our behavior toward these girls. We see their parents' failures and pin them like labels onto their children. That is lazy, harmful, and profoundly unprofessional." The words cut sharper than any shout. Even Sarah, who usually met anger with fire, sat frozen in awe. Emily felt her throat tighten. Someone was finally saying what she had screamed inside her head for years. Mrs. Harlan tried to gather herself. "Mr. Daniels, you have no right." "I have every right," he interrupted, his tone still calm. "Because my responsibility is to the students' well-being. And I'll remind you, every single child in this building has the right to be treated as an individual, not as a shadow of their family. When you humiliate Lily in front of her peers, you're not teaching responsibility. You're teaching shame. And shame never helps a child grow." A silence thick as stone fell over the room. Even the students, usually thrilled to see authority figures argue, sat wide-eyed and silent. Mr. Daniels looked around the classroom, then back at Mrs. Harlan. "If any of us feel the need to judge a student based on their home life, then perhaps we should ask ourselves whether we belong in this profession at all." His words landed like thunder. Mrs. Harlan faltered, her mouth opening and closing without a retort. For the first time, she looked small, like a child caught breaking rules. Mr. Daniels finally turned toward the sisters. His voice softened. "Lily, you did your homework. You showed me yesterday. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Lily blinked, stunned. She slowly nodded, her eyes brimming. Sarah clenched her fists under the desk, not from anger, but from pride. And Emily. Emily could barely breathe. For once, they weren't alone in the fight. When Mr. Daniels left the room, a strange quiet lingered. Students shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at the sisters with a new kind of respect. And Mrs. Harlan? She didn't call on Lily again for the rest of class. Later that day, word of the confrontation spread through the school like wildfire. Some teachers grumbled about Daniel's being too soft. Others, more quietly, admitted that he had a point. For the sisters, it was the first time an adult's voice had risen in their defense. That night, as they sat together in their small bedroom, Sarah grinned. "Did you see her face? She looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole." By the end of the week, the school was buzzing with rumors about what had happened in Mrs. Harlan's class. Some students cheered Daniels quietly in hallways, others whispered that he'd gone too far. But for the sisters, the effect was undeniable. The weight pressing on their shoulders seemed a little lighter. On Friday afternoon, as the last bell rang, Mr. Daniels appeared at their classroom door. "Emily, Sarah, Lily," he called gently. "Would you come with me?" The sisters exchanged nervous glances. Emily's heart hammered. Had something happened again? But Daniel's face wasn't stern. It was steady, purposeful. They followed him to his office, where the warm light of the setting sun filtered through the blinds. He waited until they sat down, then leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "I want you three to hear me clearly," he began, his voice low but strong. "You've been carrying a burden that isn't yours. Every time someone whispers about your parents, every time a teacher looks at you and sees a label instead of a person, you've been told a lie. That lie says you are your parents' mistakes. That you'll grow up to be the same. That because of what happens at home, you can't be anything better." His eyes moved from Emily to Sarah to Lily, each one caught in the intensity of his gaze. "But that is not the truth." The room was utterly still. Emily felt her throat tighten, Sarah's fingers dug into her knees, and Lily leaned forward, as if afraid to miss a single word. "The truth," Daniels continued, his voice rising with conviction, "is that you are not bound by anyone else's choices. You are not your father's drinking. You are not your mother's neglect. You are not the gossip of neighbors or the scorn of teachers. You are you. And what you choose to do, who you choose to become, that's what defines you." Sarah blinked hard, her eyes stinging. Emily gripped the edge of her chair as if holding on to his words for balance. Lily, the youngest, whispered, almost afraid, "But, what if we fail? What if they're right?" Daniels leaned closer, his voice gentler now. "Failure doesn't make them right. It makes you human. Everyone fails. The difference is whether you get back up. And you three, you've been getting back up every single day just by walking into this school, facing those stairs, and refusing to disappear. That takes strength most adults can't imagine." Tears slid silently down Emily's face. For years she had begged for someone to say exactly this, that she wasn't doomed, that she wasn't broken beyond repair. Daniels pressed on, his words ringing like a vow. "I believe in you. Not because of who your parents are, but because of who you've shown yourselves to be. Emily, you protect your sisters fiercely, even when it costs you. Sarah, you never let anyone's cruelty silence your fire. Lily, you keep showing up, even when the world tells you you don't belong. These are not small things. These are the foundations of the people you are becoming." The sisters sat frozen, overwhelmed. For the first time, they felt like someone had looked past the shadows that haunted their name and seen their light instead. Daniels leaned back finally, his voice soft but resolute. "You can spend your life letting other people define you, or you can decide that your story belongs to you. Remember this, you are not your parents' shadow. You are your own light. Don't ever forget it." Silence filled the room, heavy with meaning. Emily swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Mr. Daniels, thank you." Sarah nodded fiercely, blinking back tears. Lily whispered, "We'll try." Daniels smiled gently. "Don't just try. Live it." When the girls stepped out of his office into the fading golden light, they didn't feel invisible anymore. The stares, the whispers, the prejudice, it would all still be there. But for the first time, they believed it didn't have to own them. They weren't just the daughters of alcoholics. They were Emily, Sarah, and Lily. And their story was only beginning.